Here I am, Lord, send me. Sometimes the hardest and most courageous thing we can do is just be willing to show up, to be seen. Truly, authentically, and genuinely be seen. What is it that takes us then to give us the courage, not just to be seen, but to be standing up and saying, here I am. See me. Use me. Know me. Send me. I can't say those words without grace. It's grace that propels me. When my mind, my emotions, my thoughts tell me, not yet. Grace calls me. I can't talk about grace unless I talk about the Apostle Paul. That's what I want to do. See, when Paul writes his letter to the church in Corinth, he begins with the words, grace and peace to you from God. If you look at the book before Corinthians, Paul writes a letter to the church in Rome. And he does so when he begins with the words, grace and peace to you. Second letter to Corinthians, grace and peace. Galatians, grace and peace. Ephesians, grace and peace. Philippians, grace and peace. He begins his letter to the Colossians, the Thessalonians, to Timothy, to Titus, to Philemon, grace and peace. There are all sorts of definitions of the word grace. Translated as the word gift, joy, rejoice, pleasure, gratification, favor, acceptance, joy to you, Paul says. Pleasure to you, gratification, favor, acceptance, and peace to you from God. One of my favorites is grace is a favor done without expectation of return. Favor to you, joy to you, with no expectation of return. Is there a better idea than grace? Is there a more beautiful notion than a favor, a joy, a pleasure, an absolute free expression of the love of God and peace? Peace, the Hebrew word shalom, and in Greek, the word irene means harmony, wholeness, restoration, or as I once heard it put, it means every kind of good possible. What better way to start a letter than Paul does when he says joy, rejoice, pleasure, gratification, favor, acceptance, and every kind of good possible from God to you. Paul says, here I am, sent. And God used even me. Imagine getting an email that started like Paul starts his letters. What's amazing is that there are times when Paul writes these letters that he's somebody writing from prison. Betrayed, mocked, spat upon. He's had things thrown at him. People have tried to kill him. He was shipwrecked. He goes hungry because they don't feed you in prison at this time. He's persecuted, betrayed by people closest to him. He's hounded by the religious establishment that don't like what he's doing and want him dead. He's been thrown from the cliff, and when that didn't kill him, people throw stones at him. And he now is in prison, awaiting his trial, ultimate execution. He doesn't have to go through any of this. If he just gave up the Jesus talk, he could walk free. But Paul says, here I am. Here I am, just as I am right now, and I choose to continue, thrown into prison, chained to a wall, awaiting death, and I still bring myself to write letters that begin with grace and peace, joy, rejoice, gratification, pleasure, favor, acceptance, and every kind of good possible. I don't know about you, but if I were in Paul's shoes, I don't think I could bring myself to write such things, because from where I look, It would seem like every kind of bad possible. In the midst of it all, he says, let me begin. Here I am, and it is through the grace and the peace of God. Whatever happens, whatever situation you find yourself in, whatever life throws at you, leave space for grace. What if everything we did began with grace and peace too? What if we put grace first? How often do we wait to experience grace until it's all gone wrong? How often do we use grace as a solution to solve our problems? What if we started from a place of grace? Or what peace we often forfeit? Or what needless pain we bear? All because we do not carry. And why is grace so fundamental to Paul? Because it's the grace of God that totally transformed his life. It's what took him from who he was to who he is, and to say, here I am, send even me. We know Paul's story as he went on the road from Saul to Paul on the road to Damascus. When Paul was Saul, he was actually going around taking responsibilities for the death of people that didn't subscribe to his way of thinking, to his tribal ideology. When Paul found a group of Christians, he set out to destroy their gatherings. And in the process, some of them were killed. That was okay. Later in the letter to the Philippians, he lets people throw down their coats at his feet as a symbolic way of taking responsibility for those executions of Christians. But what's crucial here is Paul wants to be seen genuinely, authentically, just as he is. He doesn't hide from his past. He doesn't try to suppress those things, deny those things with the people that he meets. He says, here I am, just as I am. In fact, the very thing that you think that he wants to hide from, the very thing that you think that he wants to forget about, the thing that you would last imagine he'd want anybody to know about him, is the thing that he openly shares and tells people what he's done. And in so doing so, he says that Christ's saving love extended even to me. Paul puts grace and peace first because grace gave him the words to say, here I am. Send even me. Paul takes his life story and he tells it from a point of view that is the grace of God forgiving, expanding, never ceasing and extending to him his worst sins, his most egregious destructive behaviors and actions that he did against others, and God's grace still transformed him. Grace isn't just Paul's thing. It's Christ's thing too. It finds at the heart of the Christian ministry, a message. At the end of the book of Luke, he's faced a dubious trial. He's been betrayed, denied, tortured. They took him to the place of the skull, it says. They drove nails into his hands and his feet, and he's hanging in excruciating pain, dying on the cross. And Jesus chooses the words, forgive them. Extend grace to those that are doing this to me. In the parable of the prodigal son, after the son's money's run out, his life comes crashing down, and the only thing left for him to do is to go home with the tail between his legs, face the consequences, face the embarrassment. But as he approaches the farm, his father sees him from the distance. Instead of the father waiting for the prodigal son to reach him and to demand that he apologize to him, to beg for his forgiveness, to fall on his knees and to list all the ways in which he was wrong, the father sees his son and runs to him, embraces him, welcomes him, and he does it in front of everybody. That's grace. So often said that the gospel is upside down, that Jesus doesn't announce that all people who have got it right have got it blessed. He meets all the people where they are, so desperately aware of how they don't have it all together. In our deplorable condition, God meets us there, blesses us, even when we don't feel like saying, "Here I am." For many, the way that you're blessed is to do the right thing, but Jesus says, no, you're blessed in spite of all the ways that you don't do the right thing, because of grace. You met at the point when you're most vulnerable, when you're most acutely aware of everything that you are not. Grace meets you in that moment. Grace doesn't beckon you from afar. And what grace does is it frees you to own all the things that you are not. Grace meets you in the moment, and it wraps its arms around you and says, it's going to be okay. I'm not talking about what Dietrich Bonhoeffer calls cheap grace, one where you say anything, do anything, it doesn't matter, keep living your life always as you have because God's grace will forgive you, kind of like a get out of jail free card. Truth is, grace confronts us. Grace is like holding up a giant mirror to us. It doesn't fix us. It doesn't change the past. What Paul did still exists. Doesn't pay those bills that cause us so much anxiety and stress. They still exist. It confronts us with the ugly truth, but instead of beating us with it and saying, how could you? What were you thinking? You'll pay for this one day. Instead, it says, here you are. I can use you too. Because instead of grace saying, I know what you did. I know what you're feeling. I know what you're thinking. It's true. Instead of beating us with it, God, through grace, says it's going to be okay. Grace disrupts us and leads us back home. You see, we say, I can't say, here I am. I'm not ready. We say, I'm not the most disciplined, that I give in to my urges and that I feel weak. But grace says, yes, but I still trust you. We say, I'm not the smartest, most accomplished, most educated, but grace says, I still believe in you. We say we're full of regret, riddled with guilt. We beat ourselves up, but grace says, yes, but I still love you. We say, I'm not sure what I believe in. I'm confused. My faith isn't as strong as it used to be, but God, through grace, says, I still have faith in you. We say, I feel forgotten, abandoned, left out, separated, lost, and alone. Grace says, I'm still with you. We say, I've made too many mistakes. I've gone too far. I've screwed up. Grace says, yes, but you were made for so much more than this. You were created in my image, and I love you. Grace says, when we say, I can't say, here I am, grace says, there you are. There you are. Stop being defined by your circumstances, your situation. Stop clinging to the past and start looking towards a new future. Stop being defined by your past or even by your present. Don't be defined by the situations and the circumstances you find yourself in. Like Paul says, they threw me into jail to stop me from preaching and proclaiming that Jesus is Lord, but now I write letters and I preach to the prison guards. These walls, these chains, this locked door will not confine me, nor will they define me. Whatever happens, whatever situation you find yourself in, as citizens of the people of God and of heaven, share and live the grace and peace of Christ, the good news of the gospel. By grace, you are already forgiven. Here you are. God can send even you. What would it look like if we spoke this grace and peace to each other? Before we wrote that email, that person that rubs you up the wrong way, the person that just knows how to push your buttons. You know, that email that you'll send that you'll later regret. Grace and peace. What if we're now finally standing in line at the grocery store, waiting to check out? We've been there for ages, standing there in line, and it's finally you're next up in line, and the person in front of you pulls out a checkbook, and you think, grace and peace. When you're in a heated argument, your family, your friend, your neighbor, your spouse, an argument that's escalating, you feel the heat rising before both of you say something that you don't mean. You later come to regret. What would it mean to start with grace and peace? I say these things with an acute awareness that I don't live up to them. I write reactive emails. Sorry, Donald. Checks annoy me. I have heated arguments, several. If I was to grade myself on how well I do those things, how well I live to the grace and peace, I give myself a big fat F. The theologian Paul Tillich says it this way. Grace strikes us when we are in great pain and restlessness. Grace strikes us when we walk through the dark valley of a meaningless and empty life. It strikes us when we feel our separation is deeper than usual. Grace strikes us when our disgust for our own being, our indifference, our weakness, our hostility, and our lack of direction and composure have become so intolerable to us. Grace strikes us when year after year that longed for perfection does not appear. When the old compulsions reign within us as they have for decades, when despair destroys all joy and courage, sometimes in that moment, a wave of light breaks into our darkness. And it is as though a voice was saying, you are accepted. You are accepted. Accepted by that is greater than you. Simply accept the fact that you are accepted. And when that happens, we experience grace. Is there anybody here today who needs that fresh reminder of the grace of God in their lives? If so, I invite you to invite God's grace into that moment, into that event, that trauma, that addiction, that depression, that anxiety, that fear, that relationship, that insecurity, that regret. We need to invite God's grace in so that we own our story, so that it loses its power and its control over us, and we start to live the gospel, and we start to put grace and peace first, and we find ourselves not afraid to show up and to be seen, but we find ourselves, when we do show up and be seen, saying, here I am, send me, because I put grace first, not last. Here I am, send even me. Here you are. Do you know that you are sent too?